In a peaceful suburban town, surrounded by green lawns and identical houses, life seemed perfect. The people of Oakwood Hills enjoyed a quiet and predictable community where everyone knew each other, and nothing unusual ever happened. Among the neat homes and well-kept gardens, one house caught everyone's attention. It belonged to the Turners. Emily Turner, a 35-year-old English teacher at Oakwood Hills High School, had worked for years to earn the respect of her colleagues and students alike. Her poised demeanor and warm smile made her a favorite among the school's staff. With a steady career and a seemingly picture-perfect marriage, Emily's life seemed to be going as smoothly as a well-rehearsed play. Her husband, Richard Turner, was a man in his late 30s, a successful local business owner known for his meticulous nature and strong personality. Richard's love for his wife was unwavering, but over the years, his protective instincts had become stifling. He adored Emily, but in the most controlling way. Their life together was comfortable, with no signs of trouble on the horizon, until the arrival of Ryan Carter. Ryan, an 18-year-old with a troubled past, had recently transferred to Oakwood Hills High School. He had a reputation for being a delinquent, a label he had grown accustomed to after a series of unfortunate events. His father had abandoned the family when he was young, leaving his mother to battle addiction, and Ryan had learned to cope with life by shutting people out. When he arrived at Oakwood Hills, he had no expectations of making friends or fitting in. He was simply trying to escape the wreckage of his past, though he wasn't sure if that was even possible. In a school full of judgmental peers, Ryan felt like an outsider from day one. But there was something different about Emily Turner. Her gentle eyes, her encouraging words, they saw through the hardened exterior he wore like armor. Little did he know that the bond between him and his teacher would grow into something dangerous, a connection that would shatter their lives forever. Ryan Carter had never been given the chance to thrive. His father, a man of few words and even fewer actions, had walked out on the family when Ryan was just a boy. That left Ryan to shoulder the burden of being the man of the house, a role he was never prepared for. His mother, struggling with addiction, was often too inebriated to offer him any guidance or care. As a result, Ryan learned early on to fend for himself, an isolated, rebellious boy with a chip on his shoulder. When he moved to Oakwood Hills, his reputation had already preceded him. His last school in a nearby town had expelled him after a violent altercation, and his record was dotted with fights, truancy, and warnings. Oakwood Hills High School was no different. Most students assumed he was nothing but trouble and gave him a wide berth. They whispered behind his back, calling him names and ignoring him whenever he tried to make small talk. He wasn't surprised. This was how it always went. On his first day, Ryan took his seat in the back of the classroom, slumping down in his chair, arms crossed, not wanting to draw attention. But something unexpected happened that day. Mrs. Emily Turner, the kind and composed English teacher, singled him out in a way no one else had ever done. Instead of focusing on his reputation or his attitude, she saw something in him. There was a quiet intelligence in his eyes, a flicker of potential beneath the surface. She greeted him with a soft smile and asked him to come to the front, a gesture that surprised him. Emily offered to help him after class, a simple act of kindness that made Ryan feel seen for the first time in a long while. The other students looked on in disbelief. How could she be so patient with someone like him? But Emily didn't care about their whispers. She cared about Ryan. Her attention was a lifeline to Ryan, who had never felt so appreciated in a classroom before. Emily's gentle encouragement was like a balm to his bruised soul, and he found himself looking forward to her classes more than he had ever anticipated. Richard, Emily's husband, however, wasn't as welcoming of Ryan. Richard was a man who liked control, who believed in clear boundaries, and Ryan represented everything that disturbed the calm order he worked so hard to maintain. He noticed a change in Emily, the way she spoke about her troubled student with compassion and interest. Richard didn't like it. He found Ryan's presence unsettling and warned Emily to keep her distance, convinced the boy would only bring trouble. But Emily, ever the optimist, brushed off Richard's concerns. Ryan needed her, and she could help him. There was no harm in that, was there? As the weeks passed, Ryan's transformation in Emily's class was undeniable. He became more engaged, more present. He answered questions, completed his assignments, and, most notably, he started showing signs of hope, something he hadn't felt in years. Emily's patience and encouragement were like a beacon in the darkness of his life, and slowly, he began to trust her. During one of their private tutoring sessions, Ryan opened up about his troubled home life. He confessed how his father had walked out on him and how his mother had turned to alcohol, leaving him to fend for himself. Emily listened intently, offering sympathy and understanding. For the first time, Ryan didn't feel judged. He wasn't just a troubled kid to her, he was a person who mattered. This shared vulnerability began to form a bond between them. Emily found herself thinking more about Ryan than she should have. The connection between teacher and student, while professional, began to blur. She looked forward to their sessions, to seeing him, to hearing about his day. It was a distraction from the emptiness she felt at home, where Richard's controlling nature had started to take a toll on their relationship. At home, Richard had become more and more demanding. He scrutinized Emily's every move, questioning her late nights and secretive behavior. He didn't like the way she spoke about Ryan or the way she defended him. Richard had always been the one to fix things. He prided himself on his ability to solve problems and maintain control. But when it came to Emily's growing attachment to Ryan, he felt powerless. Richard's increasing obsession with Emily's interactions with Ryan didn't go unnoticed. He began to question her, confront her, and in the moments when he grew angry, Emily could see the coldness in his eyes. Their marriage, once built on love and mutual respect, now felt like a cage. Richard's need to control every aspect of her life was suffocating, and Emily began to feel like she was losing herself. Ryan, on the other hand, continued to seek Emily's attention. He became more and more infatuated with her, finding solace in her kindness and guidance. For Ryan, Emily was a symbol of safety, something he had never had. She was kind to him, and in her eyes, he saw hope. She made him feel wanted, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Emily, though, didn't realize the danger in her own emotions. She began to seek out Ryan's company more, using their tutoring sessions as an excuse to escape the growing tension at home. She started to see Ryan not just as a student but as someone who made her feel alive again. She felt needed, wanted, and she was flattered by his attention. She began to care for him more deeply than she should have. As Emily's attachment to Ryan grew, her marriage to Richard grew more strained. She didn't know how to balance the two worlds, the one she had created with Richard, and the one that was emerging with Ryan. But the more she tried to hold them both together, the more it became clear that one would eventually have to give. One late afternoon, after a long tutoring session, Ryan and Emily found themselves alone in the classroom. The school had emptied out, the corridors were silent, and for a brief moment, they were the only two people in the world. Ryan, who had been silent for most of the session, suddenly spoke up, his voice trembling slightly. "Mrs. Turner, I have to tell you something," he said, his tone serious. I think I have feelings for you." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected this. She had known that Ryan had grown fond of her, but hearing it aloud was different. For a moment, she was speechless. Her mind raced. This wasn't right, she thought. She was married. She was his teacher. But there was something about Ryan's words, his sincerity, that stirred something deep within her. "Ryan, she began, but Ryan interrupted her. "I'm not asking you to leave your husband or anything. I needed to tell you. You're the only person who's ever made me feel like I'm worth something. I just needed you to know." The words hung in the air. Emily wanted to respond, to set boundaries, but a part of her didn't want to. She didn't want to hurt him. She didn't want to disappoint him. He had been through so much, and she had been there to help him. The connection they shared felt real, felt genuine, and in that moment, it felt more important than any rules or boundaries. Torn between guilt and an overwhelming sense of freedom, Emily hesitated. It wasn't just that Ryan was younger, or that he was her student, it was that he made her feel alive in a way Richard no longer did. With Richard, she was just a wife. With Ryan, she was seen. The decision she made in that moment would change everything. The days following that moment in the classroom were filled with uncertainty for Emily. She couldn't stop thinking about Ryan's confession, nor could she ignore the flutter of excitement it caused in her. She tried to shake it off, to tell herself that it was just a passing phase, but deep down, she knew that something had shifted. Her feelings for Ryan were no longer just those of a teacher or mentor, they were personal, they were complicated. At home, Richard began to notice the subtle changes in Emily. She was distant, more withdrawn, and the long hours she spent at school no longer seemed like just a professional commitment. Richard's suspicions grew as he observed her behavior. She started coming home late, staying up later than usual, and her phone was always by her side, as if she were waiting for a message that never came. He couldn't help but feel that something was off, and that something had changed between them. One evening, over dinner, Richard confronted Emily. His tone was sharp, his voice tinged with accusation. "You've been acting strange lately, Emily. Who are you talking to so much? What's going on at school? Is there someone else?" he demanded. Emily froze, caught off guard by his directness. "What are you talking about?" she asked, trying to play it off as if nothing were wrong. "I know you've been distant," Richard pressed. "And I've seen the way you act when you talk about that boy, Ryan. I don't trust him, Emily. He's trouble. And you're spending too much time with him. I want you to stay away from him. Do you understand?" The tension in the room was palpable. Emily's heart raced. She wanted to deny it, to say that Richard was being paranoid, but she knew that part of what he said was true. She had been spending more time with Ryan. She had grown closer to him than she had ever intended to. But Richard didn't need to know the full extent of it. She lied, her voice shaking slightly. "I'm just trying to help him, Richard. He's going through a tough time. I'm not doing anything wrong." Richard didn't buy it. He could see the hesitation in her eyes, the uncertainty in her voice. He didn't trust Ryan, and he certainly didn't trust Emily's sudden shift in behavior. The confrontation ended with an uncomfortable silence, but Richard's mind was now made up. He was going to keep an eye on Emily, and he was going to find out exactly what was happening between her and Ryan. As Emily's relationship with Ryan grew deeper, so did Ryan's feelings for her. The line between student and teacher had long since blurred for him. He no longer saw her just as someone who helped him with his studies, she had become something much more significant in his life. She was his escape from the turmoil that had always surrounded him. With Emily, he felt understood, valued, something he had never felt before. But as their connection deepened, so did Ryan's possessiveness. He began to grow jealous of the life Emily had outside of their bond. Every time she spoke about her husband, Richard, Ryan's anger flared. How could she love someone else when she had shown him so much affection? Didn't she understand how much he cared for her? One afternoon, after a tutoring session, Ryan confronted Emily. His voice was low but intense. "Why do you still stay with him, Emily? You don't love him. You love me. Why don't you just leave him and be with me? We can start fresh, together. You deserve better than him." Emily was taken aback. "Ryan, we've talked about this. I can't just leave Richard. It's not that simple." But Ryan wasn't listening. His jealousy had begun to consume him. "If you don't leave him, I'll tell everyone. I'll tell them everything, about us, about what we've been doing. If you really care about me, you'll make a choice. It's him or it's me." Emily was horrified. She had known things were getting complicated, but she never expected Ryan to threaten her in such a way. She knew that Richard would never forgive her if he found out, and she couldn't bear the thought of losing her career. But the idea of losing Ryan, someone who had made her feel alive, was just as terrifying. As the days passed, Ryan's demands grew stronger. He called her more frequently, texted her relentlessly, and each time they met, he seemed to become more desperate. The line between affection and obsession was beginning to blur, and Emily didn't know how to stop it. She felt trapped. Richard was becoming more suspicious, and Ryan was becoming more insistent. Emily didn't know what to do anymore. The walls were closing in on her from all sides. Everything came to a head one evening after a particularly tense tutoring session. Richard had been on edge all week, and Emily could feel his suspicion growing with each passing day. He had started questioning her more frequently about her whereabouts, and his tone had become sharper, more accusatory. Emily tried to brush it off, but she could feel the pressure mounting. That evening, as the school day ended and the halls emptied, Emily and Ryan were in the classroom alone. Ryan, his face flushed with emotion, was standing close to Emily. He reached out and took her hand, looking at her with intensity. "I can't do this anymore," Ryan said, his voice shaking. "I can't stand seeing you with him. It's tearing me apart, Emily. Please, just tell me what you want. I need to know. I can't keep pretending that this is just some teacher-student thing." Emily pulled her hand away, panic rising in her chest. "Ryan, we can't do this. This is wrong. We're crossing a line we can't uncross." Ryan's face twisted with frustration. "You don't get it, do you? I love you. And I can't let you go back to him. He's controlling you, Emily. He doesn't understand you. But I do. And I'm the one who's been there for you. Don't you see that?" The intensity in Ryan's voice made Emily's heart race. She had always known he was passionate, but this was different. He was desperate. His eyes bore into hers, filled with a mix of love and possessiveness. And in that moment, Emily realized that things had gone too far. There was no going back. The door to the classroom creaked open, and Richard walked in. His eyes locked onto the scene before him, Emily and Ryan standing too close together, their hands almost touching, the tension palpable in the air. "What's going on here?" Richard's voice was cold and angry. Emily froze, caught in the act of something she could no longer deny. Ryan turned to face Richard, his eyes dark with defiance. "This is none of your business," Ryan spat. "Stay out of it, Richard." Emily felt a lump form in her throat. The confrontation she had been avoiding had finally arrived. Richard's expression hardened as he stepped closer, his eyes flickering between Emily and Ryan. He knew something was going on, and now there was no denying it. The tension in the air was unbearable as Richard's voice rang out, his anger palpable. "I don't care what you think, Ryan. This is my wife. You stay away from her." Ryan stepped forward, his fists clenched, his eyes full of rage. "You don't deserve her. She's not yours to control, Richard. She's made her choice." The words stung, and Emily could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on her. She knew Richard would never forgive her if he found out the full extent of her relationship with Ryan. Worse, if he confronted her in front of others, she would lose everything. Her career, her reputation, and the love she had for Ryan could be destroyed in an instant. Richard's gaze turned to Emily, his eyes filled with a mix of hurt and anger. "Is this true, Emily? Have you been seeing him behind my back?" Emily wanted to deny it, but the look on Richard's face told her that he already knew too much. He could sense the truth. She could no longer hide what had been happening. But Emily wasn't ready to face the consequences. She wasn't ready to lose Ryan. The thought of being alone with her guilt and Richard's wrath was too much to bear. She felt cornered, trapped by her own actions. In a moment of desperation, Emily made a choice. She knew she couldn't let Richard expose her. The only way out, in her mind, was to eliminate the threat once and for all. That night, Emily prepared dinner as usual, trying to maintain the appearance of normalcy. But inside, she was shaking with fear. She had been planning this for days, knowing that it was the only way she could keep her life intact. She poured a small amount of poison into Richard's drink, making sure he wouldn't notice. It was subtle enough to pass as something innocent. She served the drink to him, watching as he sipped it, oblivious to the danger. After dinner, Emily acted as though nothing was wrong. She went to bed early, lying next to Richard, listening to the faint sound of his breathing growing heavier and slower. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest as she waited for the inevitable. Hours later, Richard was dead. His heart had failed him, and Emily knew she had succeeded. She woke up in the morning, feigning shock and grief as she called for help, announcing that her husband had passed away from what appeared to be a sudden heart attack. Ryan had provided the perfect alibi, and Emily played her part flawlessly. But deep down, she knew the weight of her actions would come crashing down eventually. Still, in that moment, she felt a sense of relief. She had done what she had to do, and now, she was free. In the days following Richard's death, Emily tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy. She attended his funeral, surrounded by friends and family, her face an image of shock and sorrow. On the outside, she played the role of a grieving widow perfectly, but on the inside, she felt a mix of relief and guilt. The relief came from knowing that she had removed Richard from the equation, but the guilt, the guilt was overwhelming. She couldn't stop thinking about what she had done. Ryan, too, seemed to be struggling with the aftermath. At first, he was the perfect support system, always there to comfort Emily, always assuring her that everything would be fine. But as the days wore on, Emily noticed a change in him. He began to grow clingy, desperate for her attention. His texts became more frequent, his calls more demanding. At first, Emily thought it was just a phase. Ryan was still young, after all, and his emotions were likely running high after everything that had happened. But soon, his behavior became more erratic. He started showing up unannounced, insisting that they meet even when it wasn't convenient for her. He was becoming possessive, and it made Emily uncomfortable. Meanwhile, the community began to whisper. Richard's sudden death had raised suspicions. No one knew what to make of it. Some people speculated that his death was the result of years of stress, others whispered about the tension in the Turner household. But no one suspected Emily. At least, not yet. Emily's paranoia began to creep in. Every time she saw a police car drive past, every time someone looked at her with too much curiosity, she felt a pang of fear. She knew she had gotten away with murder, but how long would that last? And what if Ryan, driven by his own need for control, started to expose their secret? Ryan's behavior was starting to raise eyebrows as well. He was acting out more than ever. He had started getting into trouble at school, and rumors about his relationship with Emily began circulating among the students. Some of the staff members at the school were whispering too. Emily could sense the walls closing in. The pressure was mounting. She tried to keep Ryan calm, but his jealousy was becoming harder to manage. The sense of dread hung over Emily's life like a storm cloud. She had hoped that killing Richard would solve her problems, but now, it seemed like it had only brought more trouble into her life. It wasn't long before everything unraveled. Ryan's erratic behavior had caught the attention of the police. He had been spotted arguing with Emily late at night on several occasions, his anger evident to anyone who had been near the school grounds. One neighbor's security camera had captured footage of the two of them arguing outside Emily's house, the intensity of the confrontation impossible to ignore. The video surfaced online, and soon, rumors about Emily and Ryan's relationship spread like wildfire. Detectives began to take notice, and soon, they were asking questions. Emily's facade of grief began to crack as the investigation into Richard's death deepened. At first, the detectives were polite, but the more they dug, the more they uncovered. Emily's story about Richard's sudden death started to fall apart. Ryan, unable to handle the pressure of being questioned, cracked under the weight of his guilt. During a police interrogation, he confessed to everything. The relationship with Emily, the murder of Richard, it all came spilling out in a flood of tears and regret. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," Ryan said, his voice trembling. "But she needed me. She said Richard was controlling her. She said she couldn't live with him anymore, and I didn't want to lose her." The confession was damning. Emily's involvement in Richard's death was clear, and the evidence that had once seemed so subtle now pointed directly to her. She was arrested the following morning. The media descended on her like vultures, and her once respected career was ruined. Emily's arrest was a public spectacle. Her name was plastered on every news outlet, and the community, once supportive of her, turned their backs. She had gone from a respected teacher to a criminal in a matter of days. The life she had so carefully crafted had come crashing down around her. As the trial unfolded, Emily's life continued to spiral out of control. Ryan faced legal consequences, but because of his age and the way Emily had manipulated him, he was spared from murder charges. He was sentenced to a lesser charge, and his life, too, was forever marked by the events that had transpired. Emily, however, was convicted of murder. Her actions, driven by greed, desire, and a need to escape her suffocating life, had led to the death of her husband, a man she had once loved. Now, behind bars, Emily had plenty of time to reflect on her choices. She had lost everything: her career, her reputation, and, most tragically, her freedom. In prison, Emily spent her days in isolation, haunted by the memory of Richard's death. She couldn't escape the weight of her actions. But the most painful realization of all was that it had all been for nothing. Ryan, the boy she had sacrificed so much for, had abandoned her the moment things became too real. He had used her, just as she had used him. In the quiet solitude of her prison cell, Emily reflected on the choices that had led her to this point. She had allowed her desires and emotions to cloud her judgment, and in doing so, she had destroyed everything she held dear. The perfect facade she had once built had shattered beyond repair. As the narrator, I ask you to consider the consequences of unchecked desires. When we allow ourselves to be driven by emotions, without stopping to think of the long-term repercussions, we often find ourselves on a path we can never turn back from. Emily's story serves as a tragic reminder of how easily a seemingly perfect life can fall apart when we let our deepest, darkest impulses take control.